They say the most devastating catastrophes in human life don't happen with a crash of thunder, but in absolute, ringing silence. And more often than not, they are caused by the very people for whom we were ready to give up our last breath. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old. If you look at me today, you will see the typical silhouette of a successful woman from the business districts of the East Coast. A sharp, perfect bob that requires no extra styling time. A wardrobe consisting mostly of tailored, expensive pantsuits in dark shades. A calm, slightly cold gaze from steel gray eyes. My workday is scheduled down to the minute, and my phone rings off the hook with calls from major ship owners and executives of multinational corporations. I founded and built my own consulting firm in international logistics and supply chain management from scratch. In a world where men are reluctant to share power and money, I force them to reckon with me. My clients pay me exorbitant fees for one simple thing: the fact that there is not a single drop of emotion in my calculations, plans, and forecasts. Only dry numbers, charts, legal precedents, and risk mitigation. But it wasn't always like this. For many years, inside this armored, confident business lady lived a small, frightened girl who desperately, with an ache in her chest, wanted to hear just 3 words from those closest to her. "We're proud of you." Right now, I am sitting in the dim light of my new penthouse on the 45th floor. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows stretches a night metropolis glowing with millions of lights. A city that does not forgive weakness, but one that I ultimately conquered. On my dark mahogany desk, right in the circle of light from a designer lamp, lies an ordinary, unremarkable gray plastic flash drive. A tiny piece of plastic and silicon that weighs maybe 10 grams at most. But it was this cheap object that, on a warm June evening, completely destroyed everything I had sacredly believed in for 30 years. It turned my blind, daughterly love into icy ash, and it became the very weapon that forced my parents to sell off all their property, lose their dream home, and find themselves on the brink of total poverty and disgrace. When people who don't know the details hear the finale of this story, they usually split into 2 camps. Some look at me with undisguised horror, whispering behind my back that you can't treat your own blood like that suing your elderly parents and putting them out on the street is the height of cruelty and inhumanity. Others, those who know the inside of our family dynamic, silently walk up, shake my hand firmly, and look at me with deep respect. But for you to understand why a loving, successful, and smart daughter turned into a ruthless executioner for her own family, we need to rewind the tape. Many years back. To the time when I was still a naive fool who believed that the love of her relatives could simply be bought. If only I tried hard enough and paid all their bills. Let me tell you this story exactly as it happened, with all the details I hid in the darkest corners of my memory for years. In our family, roles were assigned in deep childhood, long before my younger brother and I even learned to read and write. This was the unspoken but rigid constitution of our house, written by my mother and silently approved by my father. Austin was born when I turned 4. Before his appearance, I was an ordinary child, but on the day he was brought home from the hospital, my childhood officially ended. Austin was born pale, frail, with large, perpetually watery blue eyes and thin hair. He was often sick, fussy at night, and the whole house instantly turned into a high-security facility subordinated to his desires. I, on the other hand, grew up awkward, large, stubborn, and, to my misfortune, far too healthy. If I fell in the yard, scraping my knees to the bone on the gravel, and came home crying, my mother wouldn't even lift her eyes from the ironing board. "Stand up, Chloe. Stop crying," she would say coldly. "It's your own fault. You need to watch where you're going. You're a big girl now. Stop throwing fits." But if Austin merely tripped over the edge of the rug in the living room and sniffled slightly, a commotion arose in the house as if an earthquake had started. Mother would drop everything, scoop him up in her arms, father would run to the kitchen for medicine, and I would be sternly scolded for not watching my brother properly and making unnecessary noise. "Our Austin is so delicate, so deeply creative," Mother would often repeat at dinner, carefully moving the juiciest, best piece of meat from the shared platter onto his plate. He has a weak nervous system. He needs to be shielded from this harsh world. The boy has the soul of a true artist. But you, Chloe, well, you're a go-getter. You're stubborn as a tank. You'll survive in any conditions. This phrase, "you'll survive," became my lifelong curse, a stigma with which my parents justified any injustice and emotional callousness toward me. They used it to justify why I wasn't bought new clothes for years, forced to wear the hand-me-downs of my mother's friends' children. After all, Austin needed new orthopedic shoes, an expensive guitar, or a private art tutor. They used it to justify why my school victories, straight A's, and awards at academic competitions were taken for granted, not even deserving a brief, good job. Yet any C Austin got in math was celebrated as a victory because, for a creative child, exact sciences are such a violation of the personality. My father, Richard, always stayed away from domestic conflicts, but his silence was far more eloquent and wounding than my mother's reproaches. He worked as a minor, unnoticeable clerk in the local municipal administration. He earned a pittance, barely enough to cover basic needs, but at the same time possessed the immense, inflated pride of a hereditary intellectual. He loved to sit in his worn rocking chair with a volume of classical philosophy, lecturing on the decline of morals and the spiritual crisis of modern society. For my father, the world was clearly divided into two categories. On one side was the cultured thinking elite, to which he, of course, unconditionally clustered himself in Austin. On the other were the greedy corporate sharks, soulless robots ready to sell their souls for green pieces of paper. When I was in high school, I realized that if I didn't take care of my own future, I would stay in that house forever as a free maid for my brother. I started working secretly, scrubbing floors at the local library, covering cashier shifts at a 24-hour grocery store, taking any dirty job after school. Every dollar I earned, I put away into a secret bank account. When my parents accidentally found out about it, a massive fight broke out at home. Father looked at me with such deep contempt, as if I had committed a crime. "Saving money at your age? Cheaply shortchanging customers?" He shook his head, sighing heavily. "Chloe, your mother and I tried to instill a taste for the beautiful in you, but unfortunately, the lowest, most petty bourgeois instincts are winning in you. Instead of reading books, you think only of profit. This is a troubling sign." I was 16. I locked myself in my tiny room, buried my face in the pillow, and cried silently until dawn. I wanted to prove to him that I wasn't bad, that I just wanted to study, wanted to have normal clothes, wanted not to be afraid of tomorrow. But my crying didn't matter to anyone. Behind the wall, Mother was loudly discussing with Austin which expensive frame they needed to buy for his new watercolor painting. When I turned 17, I went to college in another state. It wasn't a prestigious Ivy League university. I simply didn't have the money for that. I chose a modest state university with a strong department of economics and logistics, which granted me a partial scholarship for my academic achievements. I will never forget the day of my departure. It was a gray, rainy August morning. My suitcase, bought at a thrift sale, stood in the hallway. Mother didn't even come out into the hall. She was busy preparing a special herbal tea for Austin, who had a migraine again due to the change in weather. Father came out to see me to the door. He stood leaning against the frame in his invariably worn corduroy jacket, looking indifferently as I tried to zip up the suitcase. "Well, Chloe," he said dryly, making not the slightest movement to help me. "You've chosen your path. Logistics, trade, hauling other people's boxes, hustling in this corporate mud. It's certainly not what your mother and I dreamed of. We hoped you would go into science, education, but apparently, to each their own. Someone has to do the primitive, practical work. Main thing, try not to lose your human face completely among your future greedy colleagues." Austin, who came out into the hallway in a silk robe, smiled sympathetically and slightly condescendingly, fixing his overgrown curls. "Chloe, come on, don't be mad at Father," he drawled lazily. "At least you'll always have money for expensive makeup and clothes. You're grounded after all. But I've decided to study philosophy, existentialism, and psychoanalytic theory in depth starting next semester. I want to understand the very essence of human existence, to touch eternity. Granted, the books on this topic are insanely expensive, and Father had to sell his old collectible watch to pay for this course. But it's worth it. I looked at my brother, then at my father. Inside me, a storm of resentment, anger, and wild loneliness rages. I wanted to scream, "What about me? Why did you never once ask if I had money for textbooks? Why didn't you ask how I was going to live in a strange city?" But I knew the answer. The answer was always the same. "You're strong. You'll survive." I silently picked up the heavy suitcase, left the house, and walked to the train station in the pouring rain. I didn't have money for a taxi. Every cent was calculated to the second. On the Amtrak train, I rode for several hours, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, looking at the gray landscapes flying by. And it was during those hours, to the rhythm of the wheels, that the foolish, desperate, destructive desire that defined my life for the next 10 years was born inside me. I will prove it to them. I will become so rich, so successful and influential that they won't be able to ignore me anymore. They will see my value. They will finally love me. It was the biggest, most tragic mistake of my life. I didn't understand that people who don't love you just for who you are will never love you for your achievements. They will only learn how to use them. Chapter 4. A Marathon for Survival. The next 7 years of my life blurred into one continuous, grueling, gray marathon where the only landmarks were numbers, deadlines, and endless liters of cheap vending machine coffee. After graduating from college with honors, I got a job at a large international shipping company. It was an entry-level, lowest-tier position in the corporate sales and fleet coordination department. My workday started at 5 in the morning and ended well past midnight. I took calls from dispatchers in the ports of Singapore, Rotterdam, and Shanghai, dealt with containers stuck at customs, smoothed over conflicts with furious clients, and plowed through tons of maritime and international law. Was it hard for me? That doesn't even begin to cover it. It was hell. There were weeks when I slept for only 3 or 4 hours a night, right on the office couch, a folder of documents tucked under my head. My first rented apartment in a sketchy neighborhood of Brooklyn was so tiny and old that in the winter, the draft from the cracks in the windows blew so hard that I had to sleep fully dressed, covering myself with 3 coats on top of the blanket. After paying rent and my student loans, I had mere pennies left, and I calculated to the gram how many packs of cheap pasta I could buy for the week. But I didn't complain. I pushed forward stubbornly, with gritted teeth. My pragmatic, sharp mind and ability to remain absolutely calm in moments of utter chaos quickly caught management's attention. I began to rise rapidly up the career ladder. First senior manager, then regional head, then director of logistics for the East Coast. At 28, I realized I had outgrown employment. I knew the market from the inside. I had personal contacts with key players, and I saw the systemic errors of large corporations that I could fix. I resigned, took 3 of my best analysts with me, and opened my own logistics consulting agency. The first 2 years of working for myself were pure madness. I risked everything I had, leveraged my first purchased apartment, and worked 20 hours a day with no days off. But the model worked. We offered clients a unique, customized supply chain optimization system that saved them millions of dollars by bypassing standard bureaucratic channels. 3 years later, my firm went international. Money that used to seem like unattainable, astronomical sums turned into ordinary, familiar figures on the company's bank accounts. I moved into a spacious, sun-drenched apartment in a prestigious area, switched to a brand-new premium European SUV, started dressing in clothes from the best designers, and hired a personal assistant. I had achieved everything one could dream of. And of course, all these years I continued to call home regularly, every week. I naively thought that now that I was at the top, everything would change. Chapter 5. Professional Sacrifices. Every single call to my mother followed the exact same psychological script, calculated over the years. I would dial her number, full of hope, eager to share my successes. "Hey, Mom, how are things? How is Dad's health?" I'd ask cheerfully. Guess what? My firm just closed a massive contract with a major port terminal this week. We're expanding. In response, a long, heavy, agonizing sigh of cosmic sorrow would echo through the receiver. Oh, Chloe. Well, I'm glad for you, of course. Glad that everything comes so easily and smoothly for you. Money, contracts. But over here, honey, things are the same as always. It's very hard. They raised the premium on your father's health insurance. His joints have completely given out, and the medications cost an absolute fortune. Inflation is just eating away at our tiny pensions. We're literally counting pennies at the grocery store. Electricity went up, and the utility company sent a bill so high your father almost had a heart attack. We live in constant stress, barely making ends meet. In that exact moment, something inside me would violently twist. All my triumph, all my pride in the new contracts would instantly evaporate, giving way to a suffocating, toxic sense of guilt. I would become agonizingly, unbearably ashamed of my success. How could I dine at expensive restaurants, buy designer clothes, and live in absolute comfort while my aging, ailing parents were drowning in provincial poverty? Subconsciously, I bought into their logic. Since everything came easily to me, even though behind that easily lay years of grueling labor and ruined health, it meant I was obligated to atone for my sins before them. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I'd ask, flustered. "Let me help. How much money do you need? I can wire any amount right now." And that's when the second part of their manipulative trap would snap shut. Mom's tone would instantly shift to proud and deeply offended. "Oh, absolutely not, Chloe. Thank you, but no. We know perfectly well how you get that money of yours. You're wheeling and dealing in that business of yours, cutting corners, probably cheating people. Your father always says an honest person should live modestly and by their own labor. We don't need your dirty corporate handouts. We'll get by on bread and water somehow. We're no strangers to sacrificing for our children. Just don't forget about Austin. Things are so hard for the poor boy right now. He's writing a stunning, profound philosophical essay for an independent online journal. They aren't paying him a single cent for it, of course. It's pure, high intellectual journalism, not your cargo boxes. But the boy needs to grow. He needs inspiration. We're racking our brains trying to figure out how to help him. It's hard for us, Chloe. Very hard." They never asked for money directly. They acted far more subtly, far more maliciously. They engineered an atmosphere where I had to beg them to accept my help. They framed my wealth as corrupt and dirty, but gave me to understand that purely out of magnificent parental mercy, they might allow me to absolve my sin of success. So, I devised a plan that seemed to me at the time the absolute height of nobility and genius. I decided to help them secretly, without any grand gestures, so as not to wound my father's bloated, fragile pride, or trigger another lecture on the purity of the soul. Why bring them envelopes of cash and provoke screaming matches? I decided to simply, systematically liquidate all their financial problems in total silence. Through my corporate channels and a hired private investigator, I quietly uncovered the account details for the mortgage my father had taken out years ago, completely unbeknownst to them. He and my mother had dreamed all their lives of a large, beautiful country home in Connecticut, a 2-story colonial-style estate with white pillars and a veranda. They bought the land and started construction, but quickly sank into debt. The interest rates soared, they couldn't keep up with the payments, the contractors froze the project, and the house stood half-built, slowly rotting under the rain. I contacted the lending bank, provided my financial credentials, set up an automatic monthly wire transfer from my personal account, and began quietly paying off their entire mortgage. Furthermore, I threw in an extra $2,000 to $3,000 every month toward the principal balance to kill that financial bondage as fast as humanly possible. Next, I turned my attention to Austin. My spiritual, anti-materialistic brother who despised capitalism turned out to be a thoroughly basic, highly undisciplined consumer in reality. Taking advantage of the fact that our parents never said no to him, he had managed to rack up a mountain of credit card debt and short-term payday loans at utterly predatory, astronomical interest rates. And for what? He urgently needed the highest-end, most expensive Apple tech, because a true philosopher needs only the finest tools to record his thoughts. He regularly went on pricey wellness retreats to unblock his chakras, and he left astronomical tabs at trendy metropolitan lounge bars where he went searching for inspiration. Collection agencies were already ringing my parents' phone off the hook, sending letters threatening legal action, and Mom would weep on the phone, dropping heavy hints about some horrific tragedy that could destroy our sensitive boy. I didn't stage a family intervention. Instead, I hired a professional financial attorney. We gathered a complete database of all of Austin's hidden debts, microloans, and lines of credit. And I cleared them all, down to the very last cent. Paid directly to the creditors and banks, demanding official, written certificates of full discharge and account closure for every single item. In total, it cost me well over $100,000 over a few years to pull my brother out of the debtor's pit and finish building my parents' house. As I authorized those massive wire transfers, I truly felt like a secret guardian angel. I often pictured my father logging into his online banking portal, seeing the balance of his crushing debt miraculously melting away before his eyes, taking a deep breath of relief, and hugging my mother. I thought, they must figure it's me. There's no anyone else. They see my care. They see I'm not a callous egoist. Their hearts will gradually thaw, and one day they will say thank you. What tragic, blind naivety! I had absolutely no understanding of the true scale of human audacity, selfishness, and parasite behavior. Once a year, usually in early July for the Independence Day weekend, I would take a brief 3-day vacation, completely shut down my corporate email, and drive up to Connecticut. These visits were always the most grueling ordeal of my year, demanding a colossal amount of emotional stamina. Preparing for the trip required a literal masquerade. I intentionally left my premium European SUV in a secured underground parking garage in New York City. Instead, I ordered a standard, cheap Uber economy. I took off my expensive Swiss watch and locked my designer jewelry and rings in my safe. I dressed in a plain, slightly stretched gray hoodie, worn-out jeans, and basic sneakers from a supermarket. I was scared to death of provoking my father, for whom even the slightest marker of my financial success acted like a red rag to a bull. Any expensive detail on my person would instantly trigger a wave of his biting, passive-aggressive sarcasm about bloated bourgeois pigs who don't know the value of honest labor. But even this masquerade couldn't save me. The atmosphere in that house was always thick with underlying tension and hypocrisy. Those family dinners played out like clockwork. We would gather in the spacious, beautiful dining room of that very same colonial house, the exact house that had been completed at a breakneck pace solely because of my aggressive principal payments. My parents, however, had completely brainwashed themselves and everyone around them into a bizarre fairy tale. Supposedly, the bank had executed a global restructuring in favor of honest citizens, or a miraculous computer glitch had magically slashed their debt to a fraction of the cost. They proudly bragged about this to their neighbors at the country club, attributing the miracle to their pure karma and high spirituality. Father sat at the head of the table, arrogantly pouring himself an expensive craft beer, looking at me over his glasses with his signature judgmental stare. "So, Chloe," he'd begin, precisely slicing a piece of roasted meat. "Still hustling in that corporate mud of yours? Still pushing papers and counting other people's millions while real people are out there creating culture?" "I'm just working, Dad," I'd reply quietly, trying to keep my composure as I pushed a salad around my plate with a fork. "My firm is expanding. We opened a new branch, hired more staff." Staff, branches," he'd sneer skeptically. "Money comes and goes, Chloe. Today you're riding high. Tomorrow your little operation pops like a soap bubble, and you're left with nothing. Just make sure you don't lose your soul in this chase for profit. Look at Austin instead. The boy is only 24, and he's already reading Kierkegaard and Nietzsche in the original text. He's searching for the true meaning of existence, trying to awaken society. Yes, These are dark, materialistic times, and his profound insights aren't in high demand among the uneducated, primitive masses. But he carries the light. He engages in real, pure labor. Austin, sitting across from me in a flawlessly pressed silk shirt, would smile condescendingly, delicately dabbing his lips with a napkin. That shirt, as I knew perfectly well, had been bought with the money our parents now had in abundance because they weren't paying a single cent for their mortgage. "Dad, come on, don't pressure Chloe," my brother would drawl lazily, his tone deeply patronizing. "She just has that pragmatic, grounded mindset, strictly corporate, administrative. She isn't biologically equipped to understand what it's like to sit alone with great ideas for weeks, agonizing over the imperfections of the world. She needs tangible, primitive metrics, profits, reports, invoices. To each their own, after all. Someone has to be a blue-collar laborer for the system. By the way, Mom, I'm planning a trip next month to a secluded spiritual community in Sedona, Arizona. There's an exclusive seminar on enlightenment and quantum psychology by a leading guru. Granted, the registration and lodging cost an absolute fortune, money we don't have, but it is vitally important for my next article." Mom would instantly throw her hands up, gazing into her favorite child's eyes with utter devotion. "Of course, Austin. Say no more, my darling. We will absolutely figure something out. We'll make it happen. Your father and I will tighten our belts, we'll save on food, clip coupons, skip our medications if we have to, but we will send you to that seminar. You are our pride, our only hope that our family name will be preserved in the history of culture, not like some people." And Mom would pointedly look across the table at me with heavy, burning reproach. "Some people around here are literally swimming in cash, buying apartments downtown, but would never even think to buy their own mother a new medical blood pressure monitor. She comes to visit once a year, and couldn't even bring a bottle of decent wine to the table, showing up empty-handed in those ripped jeans of hers. An egoist to her very core. Thinks only of her bank account. What a cold, dry soul." In moments like that, everything inside me burned with rage. I wanted to leap up, flip the damn table over, pull out my phone, open my banking app, and hurl the payment history of the last 5 years right into their faces. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, "You hypocritical monsters! This house you're sitting in, this meat you're gorging on, this beer, Austin's shirt, and his goddamn trip to Sedona, all of it exists solely because I, your cold egoist, work like a slave every single month and wire thousands of dollars to save you from disgrace and debt collectors." But I would bite my lip until it bled, lower my eyes, and stay silent. Years later, my therapist would explain to me that this was a textbook, severe case of savior complex, fueled by childhood rejection trauma. Subconsciously, I agreed to play the role of the family villain, the selfish fool, just to maintain some semblance of a connection with them. I naively comforted myself with the thought, let them drag my name through the mud, let them think I'm the bad guy. The main thing is that they are safe. They live in warmth and comfort, and they have a roof over their heads because of me. My duty as a daughter is fulfilled. If only I had known what kind of twisted, vile gratitude they were brewing for me behind the scenes of this family idol. It was June 2026. My father was turning 60. A major milestone, a diamond jubilee. My parents decided to celebrate this day on such a grandiose scale that our modest provincial family had never seen anything like it in its entire history. My father fantasized about rubbing it in the faces of all his former colleagues from the municipal administration and showing off his high status to his country club neighbors. A massive, luxurious ballroom was rented at the finest historic hotel in the very heart of downtown. They invited literally everyone. Distant relatives we hadn't spoken to in decades, my father's former bosses, neighbors, some sketchy local cultural figures, totaling around 70 guests. 2 months before the celebration, Mom called me. Her voice trembled over the line, constantly dropping into a tragic whisper. "Chloe, it's your father's jubilee, 60 years. You understand this might be his last major milestone in life. His health is so fragile. He dreams so much of gathering everyone, looking people in the eye with pride. But the prices, The catering and ballroom rental at this hotel are just insane, astronomical. We calculated the estimate. The banquet alone comes out to an amount that means your father and I will have to sell the car and eat canned food for the next 2 years. And we still need a DJ, professional lighting, a host. Austin has nobly volunteered to direct the entire evening. He wants to give his father a stunning creative gift, a massive tribute video film about his life. But the cost of renting the projector, screens, and audio equipment from the local tech company is simply beyond our means. We are in utter despair. Your father can't sleep at night. He's crying in his study. Like a total, absolute fool, I instantly melted again at this painted picture of parental grief. My heart ached. It was a once-in-a-lifetime milestone for my father. How could I stand aside? "Mom, please calm down. Don't cry," I said firmly. "Don't sell anything, and don't skimp on medications. I am taking care of all the expenses for the Jubilee. I will fully cover the ballroom rental, all the catering, and premium shelf alcohol. I'll pay for the DJ, the technical equipment, the screens, and the lighting for Austin. Let Dad have the perfect, luxurious celebration he's dreaming of. But I have one strict condition. You must under no circumstances tell Dad that I paid for this. You know his character. He'll start lecturing me again about my dirty corporate money, claim I'm trying to buy him, his blood pressure will skyrocket, and the whole evening will be ruined. Tell him the hotel gave a massive discount for a veteran of municipal service, or make something else up. Let it all happen in silence." "Oh, Chloe, my sweet girl, thank you so very much. You are our savior." For the first time in my life, my mother's voice carried a note of such explosive, genuine gratitude that tears welled up in my eyes. I thought, this is it. They finally understand. They finally value me. I wired the funds to the hotel's event coordinator. It was a colossal sum, capable of burning a hole even in the budget of my expanding firm, but I comforted myself with the thought that I was doing this for family, for the smile on my aging father's face. And then, the evening arrived. A warm June night, a historic hotel glowing with lights. The ballroom looked immaculate. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling. Tables groaned under the weight of exquisite delicacies, black caviar, and expensive champagne. My father, in a sharp, tailored tuxedo, paced majestically among the guests, graciously accepting congratulations and expensive gifts. Mom, in a gorgeous evening gown of midnight blue velvet, sparkling with new expensive jewelry, beamed beside him like a queen at a royal reception. Austin was busily hovering near the sound engineer's technical booth in the corner of the hall, waving his arms and barking commands at the technicians, feeling like a Hollywood director at the premiere of his own blockbuster. As for me, the organizers, on my mother's explicit instructions, as I later realized, had seated me at the furthest, most inconspicuous table behind a massive pillar, next to some half-forgotten second cousins from the countryside, whom I had seen maybe twice in early childhood. These cousins spent the entire night heavily pounding the free top-shelf alcohol and relentlessly interrogating me as to why I, at 32, was still unmarried, hadn't popped out any kids, and was still messing around with those cargo boxes. They sighed sympathetically, looking at my plain, modest dress, and vied with one another to console me. "Well, it's all right, Chloe. Don't let it get you down. To each their own. But look at your brother. What a genius! A literal superstar. Did you hear what an incredible, profound speech he prepared for your father? The whole town is talking about it." I nodded silently, forcing a polite smile, and drank my water. There was no envy inside me, only a quiet, familiar sadness. I looked at my radiant parents across the massive hall and thought, so what if I'm an outsider here? The main thing is that they are happy. The main thing is that this celebration happened because of me. At the height of the banquet, the definitive, most solemn moment of the evening arrived. The host announced the creative tribute. The overhead lights in the ballroom gracefully dimmed, leaving only the intimate glow of table lamps. Austin took the wireless microphone and walked out into the dead center of the hall under the bright spotlight with a confident, theatrical stride. The music faded. Every eye in the room was fixed on him. It was, indeed, a masterfully, professionally written speech. Austin spoke in a beautiful, well-modulated voice, pausing dramatically in all the right places. He spoke of filial duty, of the continuity of generations, about how our father had carried the torch of true culture his entire life, shielding his family from the corrupting influence of materialism. He spoke about how family is a sacred sanctuary, a spiritual fortress where the avarice, greed, and cynicism of the modern capitalist world could never breach a path. And as a token of our endless love, devotion, and respect for your ideals, Dad, Austin proclaimed, theatrically pressing his hand to his heart and turning toward our father, we, your family, gift you this unforgettable evening. May this radiant hall, this celebration, stand as a symbol that true spiritual values always triumph, soaring far above the primitive hustle of the materialistic world and the thirst for profit. The hall literally exploded with a thunder of applause. People stood up from their seats, shouting, "Bravo!" Mom sobbed hysterically, smearing mascara down her face as she pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Father proudly threw his head back, wiping away a solitary manly tear, his face glowing with absolute, boundless triumph. Austin took a theatrical bow before the audience, soaking in another wave of standing ovations, and then spun around, walking briskly off the floor and behind the scenes, into the so-called green room, the backstage technical dressing room behind heavy velvet drapes, to catch his breath. My parents, exchanging ecstatic exclamations, immediately hurried after him to embrace their golden boy in a private setting, away from the eyes of the guests. They simply overlooked one tiny but fatal technical detail. As Austin left the stage, he attempted to switch off his microphone. He flicked the toggle on the chassis of the small wireless transmitter clipped to his belt. But either the button jammed, or in his haste he pressed the wrong switch, or the radio signal simply glitched and failed to sync with the receiver base. Long story short, the channel remained completely live. The microphone kept operating at maximum sensitivity, and the head sound engineer of the evening, a kid of about 22, had chosen that exact moment to step away from his mixing console to use the restroom, leaving the entire system running on autopilot. The music in the hall faded for a second. One track was smoothly transitioning into the next, creating a momentary, dead silence. And in that suddenly emerging, graveyard silence over the hushed ballroom, blasting at full volume from high-end speakers pushing several kilowatts of power, came the distinct, raspy, expensive bourbon-fueled laughter of my father. Chapter 8. Behind-the-scenes Family Business. The entire hall froze instantly. People who had been loudly chatting a second ago, reaching for their glasses, or getting up from their tables to head to the dance floor, locked up in whatever positions this sound had caught them in. It was like a children's game of freeze. The junior sound technician sitting in the booth jumped in shock. Panicking, he lunged for the mixing console, but due to fear and lack of experience, he mixed up the faders. Instead of completely cutting the audio from Austin's wireless channel, he cranked it to maximum and accidentally killed the background house music. "Good Lord, Austin, you really knocked it out of the park. That was just something else." My father's booming baritone thundered across the hall. The audio was so crisp, rich, and detailed, it sounded as if my father were standing right in the center of the room, under the crystal chandelier, rather than behind 3 layers of soundproof drapes. Your Aunt Bertha in the 3rd row practically choked on her own tears, and that passage about the materialistic world and the thirst for profit, that was absolute, pure genius. I could barely keep myself from laughing out loud. Stunning! "I just did my homework, Dad," Austin's voice replied. But there wasn't a single trace left of that noble, creative, filial solemnity that had moved the entire room to tears just a minute ago. This was a completely different voice, cynical, cold, and self-satisfied. It was the voice of an experienced, calculating con artist who had just pulled off a successful scam. The main thing in this whole business was making sure our local corporate shark over at the far table by the restroom didn't suspect a thing. Otherwise, you know Chloe, she hoards every single cent. She'd choke herself for $1, that grounded miser. We had to stroke her ego so she'd sign the checks without asking any questions. A suffocating, ringing graveyard silence hung over the ballroom. It felt as though the atmospheric pressure in the room had plummeted. All 70 guests, relatives, colleagues, neighbors, slowly, as if in slow motion, turned their heads and stared directly at me. I sat completely motionless, my back straight, squeezing a heavy metal salad fork in my right hand until my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded against my ribs with such frantic force that the beating seemed to drown out everything else around me. My face burned, but inside me, from the very depths of my soul, a new, unfamiliar wave of icy calmness began to rise. "Oh, who cares about her, that idiot?" My mother's sharp, screeching voice blared from the speakers. And this voice was the most terrifying of all. There was no trace of that soft, constantly complaining, loving mother. This was the voice of a ruthless, calculating predator. "She's just our cash cow, a brainless work animal. Heavens know what she's imagined about herself, thinking that just because she handles accounts in her New York, she's the smartest one in the family? If it weren't for our upbringing, if we hadn't beaten it into her head that she owes us until her dying day, she would be absolutely nothing, rotting away in her logistics. We'll squeeze everything out of her, down to the last cent, while we have the chance." Did you see how easily that idiot paid for this entire banquet, the alcohol, and the technicians? Didn't even blink, just pulled out her card. That means she's sitting on mountains of money, raking it in with a shovel. Let her pay, Austin. Let her sponsor our lives. She's just earning her forgiveness. "Exactly," Father chimed in, and a smacking sound could be heard over his voice. He had apparently grabbed an appetizer from the table. "We'll squeeze her completely dry, and you, Austin, will get our big Connecticut house absolutely clean, renovated, and without a single cent of debt once that fool finishes paying off the mortgage." After all, she sincerely, sacredly believes that we are scraping our pennies together for the bank out of our last bit of strength. She thinks she's saving her miserable, sick parents, that half-baked guardian angel. What an absolute idiot! She'll never suspect a thing. She only has enough brains for her cargo containers. The main thing, Austin, son, is that you keep playing our angle. Chiming in whenever she calls, reminding her of how cold and selfish she is, how she's detached from her roots and abandoned her family. Fear and guilt. Those are the two golden keys that make fools like her open their checkbooks wider and wider. Lay the guilt on her even heavier, and she'll pay for your Sedona trip and buy you a new car. "Yeah, makes sense," Austin drawled lazily, letting out a yawn. "Let her slave away for us until she dies. With her ugly, dry character and robot-like appearance, she doesn't have a shot at a personal life anyway. Nobody's ever marrying her. So she might as well bring actual financial value to the greater good, our family. All right, let's head back to the hall. Need to fix our faces and grab a drink with that old fool Kevin before he completely passes out on the free booze." The audio finally snapped off. The head sound engineer, who had sprinted into the booth with a face as white as chalk and wild terror in his eyes, simply ripped the thick main power cord of the mixing console right out of the wall outlet, tearing the plastic socket. The equipment died with a short click, but the damage had already been done. Total, absolute, irreversible damage. Everything these people had meticulously hidden for years, all their despicable, rotten, parasitic inner workings, had been broadcast at maximum volume. Clearly, articulately, without a single chance at justification. In front of all their relatives, in front of father's superiors, in front of friends and neighbors. I kept staring down at the white tablecloth in front of me. Inside my head at that moment, a strange, almost physically palpable process was unfolding. You know how movies show the aftermath of a massive explosion in slow motion? First, everything around you shatters into millions of tiny shards, buildings collapse, and then comes an absolute, vacuum-like, cosmic silence. This vacuum completely took over my mind, leaving nothing else behind. All those long years of fabricated parental guilt, all those humiliations, all that masquerading in old clothes, all my desperate, childish attempts to buy, to beg for their love and approval, All of it evaporated, burning to ashes in a single second. It left behind a crystal-clear, transparent, icy, and absolutely calm rage. The rage of an apex predator that finally realized what it was dealing with. I suddenly realized with terrifying clarity that I had never had a family. I didn't have loving parents and a vulnerable artist brother. I had 3 professional, cynical parasites, bedbugs who had masterfully weaponized my childhood psychological trauma for years to sponsor their idle, lazy lifestyle and laugh at me behind my back. I slowly, carefully lowered my fork onto the plate. The metal clicked quietly against the porcelain. I stood up to my full height. 70 pairs of eyes watched me in the absolute silence of the hall. Those looks held a mix of everything: wild shock, disgust, pity, and a deep, sticky shame for having witnessed such a filthy, disgraceful family striptease. But I didn't care about a single one of them. With a calm, confident, firm stride, the kind I usually use when walking into brutal board of directors meetings, I headed toward the sound booth in the corner of the hall. The young technician, noticing my approach, shrank into a ball, sweat rolling down his face in large drops. "Is the console recording?" I asked quietly, but with such a chilling steel in my voice that the guy flinched. Yes," he whispered, stuttering. "Our program, it automatically archives the entire audio stream from the master track onto the hard drive. The whole evening, all live mics. It's for reporting back to the agency." "Give me that recording, right now, on a flash drive." But I can't. Those are our internal files, mixing profiles, event formats. It's company property." I leaned in a bit closer, looking directly into his pupils. "Listen to me very carefully, boy. I am Chloe Collins. I personally, from my own account, paid for every single second of this hall rental, every glass on the tables, and every cent of your wage tonight along with this equipment. Give me that recording on a flash drive right now, or in 3 minutes a police squad will be here, and I will report that you are withholding my stolen corporate property and acting as an accomplice to fraud. Choose. The clock is ticking." The guy didn't argue. My gaze carried a ton of weight. With trembling fingers, he clicked a few keys on his laptop, waited for the download bar to hit 100%, pulled the gray plastic flash drive out of the USB port, and handed it to me. I clamped it tightly in my fist. This was my weapon, my judicial gavel. At that exact moment, the heavy velvet drapes at the back of the hall parted, and our holy trinity, father, mother, and Austin, majestically glided back into the ballroom. Framed, fake smiles were still plastered on their faces. They still didn't understand a thing. Because of the perfect soundproofing of the green room, they hadn't heard that their conversation had been broadcast outside. They didn't realize that the hall hadn't just heard them. The hall was completely paralyzed by their rot. They headed toward their central table of honor, ready to continue the banquet and accept toasts. I walked to intercept them. We met exactly in the middle of the hall, right under the massive, glittering crystal chandelier. Father, catching my expression, stumbled for a fraction of a second, a shadow of anxiety flickering in his eyes, but he quickly reassumed his mask of an imposing guest of honor. "Chloe, dear," he said loudly, so those around could hear. "You look rather pale. What happened? Did our exquisite catering not meet your arrogant city standards? Why are you standing in the middle of the room?" I didn't throw a scene. I didn't scream, cry, accuse them of betrayal, or hurl glasses at them. Emotions in business are an unaffordable luxury, a waste of resources, and I intended to shift our relationship strictly into the realm of cold, ruthless business. I slowly reached into my dress pocket and pulled out a set of keys with a small metal house-shaped keychain. These were the keys to their country house in Connecticut, which Mother had once given me with fake tenderness. "So that you can come up and rest from your dirty city when we aren't home." In reality, the keys had been given to me so I could haul expensive groceries to them from eco-markets and oversee the contractors. I extended my hand and, with a loud, distinct clatter, dropped the set of keys right onto a silver platter of grapes in the middle of their banquet table. "That was my final payment," I said clearly. incredibly calmly, enunciating every single syllable. My voice cut through the graveyard silence so loudly that it was heard even at the furthest rows. Mother gasped sharply, turned pale, and pressed both hands to her lips. Reality was finally, as if breaking through a thick layer of water, starting to hit them regarding the catastrophic failure that had just occurred. They looked around in panic and saw all their relatives, friends, and father's colleagues sitting with stone faces, pointedly turning away, avoiding any eye contact, while Uncle Kevin stared at father with such deep, sickening contempt, as if he were looking at a pile of garbage. "Chloe," Austin stammered, his face instantly turning a sickly ash color as sweat broke out on his forehead. He tried to take a step toward me, reaching his hand out. Did you take some joke a bit too close to heart? That was just stupid, dumb backstage banter to blow off steam before the guests. We're family, Chloe." I didn't stay to listen to this babble. I simply turned on my heels and walked toward the exit with an even, rhythmic stride. My expensive shoes clicked hollowly against the ballroom parquet. I pushed open the heavy double oak doors of the hotel and stepped out into the cool night air of the metropolis. Left behind me was a $15,000 party that, at that very second, was turning into a disgraceful, filthy wake for their fat, parasitic, lazy lives. They were foolish people, intellectual snobs who despised the laws of economics. They sacredly believed the world was run exactly how it was written in their old philosophy books. They expected a typical female emotional breakdown from me. They were certain I would lock myself in my apartment, sob for weeks, drink wine, and then call them, demanding explanations, screaming, or better yet, begging for repentance. Mother even tried to play the maternal heart card and sent me a long text message at 8 o'clock the next morning. "Chloe, you took everything monstrously out of context. Your poor father just had a bit too much bourbon. He didn't control his tongue. It was a stupid, bad male joke to seem more cynical in front of Austin. We love you more than life itself. You are our only daughter, our blood. Blood isn't water, Chloe. You can't destroy a family over a minute of stupidity. Father is near death. His blood pressure was terrifying all night. Think about what you are doing." I didn't reply. I just silently blocked her number. Then I blocked Father's number. Then Austin's number. Without a single word, without a single text. They had made one fundamental, fatal mistake. They had used the phrases "calculating corporate shark" and "soulless logistics worker" as insults against me for so long that they genuinely came to believe it meant I possessed emotional weakness and vulnerability when it came to them. They thought I was a stupid, submissive sheep just because I paid all their bills and debts without a fight. They didn't understand that I was a legally savvy, systematic shark. When I first started secretly helping them with the mortgage and clearing Austin's massive microloans, my internal corporate risk audit, a habit drilled to automation by years of working with shady port contractors, suggested one simple thing: never, under any circumstances, conduct large financial transactions as a gratuitous gift or family assistance if you are dealing with mentally unstable, toxic relatives. Every single month, when I logged into my corporate banking terminal to send another few $1,000s to their mortgage bank in Connecticut, I meticulously, scrupulously filled out the official payment memo line. On every digital receipt, on every document, in strict legal font, it read, "Provision of interest-free loan under an oral purchase/obligation servicing agreement for Father's full name." When I liquidated Austin's predatory credit lines directly to his debt collectors, the official bank memorandum stated, "Settlement of financial obligations to third parties within the structure of a long-term interest-free loan for Austin's full name." Furthermore, I didn't just leave these receipts in the digital space of the app. Every single bank confirmation was printed on paper, certified with my company stamp, matched with account statements, and neatly filed away into a large blue lever arch folder labeled Personal Assets/Loans, which was kept in my office safe. I did this purely mechanically because financial compliance and evidence collection were my second nature. Back then, I thought it was just professional deformation, over-meticulousness. It turned out to be an airtight, ironclad legal noose that my relatives had tied around their own necks, while I simply held the loose end of the rope in a firm grip. On Monday morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into my office, poured myself a cup of strong black coffee, and called Marcus into my office. Marcus was the head of our legal department, a brutal, seasoned, cynical pit bull of a lawyer with 20 years of experience who had steamrolled dozens of rogue contractors and international logistics firms in court throughout his career. I opened the safe, pulled out the heavy blue folder with the receipts, and laid it on the desk before him. Next to it, I placed that same gray plastic flash drive from the hotel. "Marcus," I said calmly, lacing my fingers together and leaning back into my leather executive chair. "Before you are documents mapping the movement of personal capital over the last 5 years. The total amount of transactions is just over $120,000. All of these funds were transferred by me to third-party accounts as targeted loans to my immediate relatives. And on this flash drive is a full audio recording from the sound console where those exact same relatives, in the presence of 70 witnesses, state in plain English that they intentionally misled me, used fraudulent psychological schemes to extract my capital, abused my trust, and entered into a prior conspiracy to unlawfully misappropriate my assets acquired through these very loans." Marcus slowly adjusted his expensive, wire-rimmed glasses, opened the folder, quickly flipped through the first 30 pages of receipts, then plugged the flash drive into his workstation laptop and put on his headphones. I silently drank my coffee, watching the expression on his face shift. He listened to the recording for about 10 minutes. A predatory, professional, ecstatic smirk of a well-fed wolf spotting defenseless prey gradually spread across his face. He took off the headphones, snapped the laptop shut, and rubbed his hands together with satisfaction. "Chloe," he drawled, tapping his knee, This is a masterpiece. This is a 100% ironclad win in any court of this country. From a civil law standpoint, we have a textbook case of unjust enrichment, abuse of trust, and breach of oral implied loan agreements. But with this audio recording, it's simply bingo. They basically dictated their own full confession of guilt and exposed their fraudulent intent to deceive and extract profit right into the record. They explicitly confirmed they knew about the payments, approved them, and planned to misappropriate the house by deceiving you. What are your final objectives, boss? I looked out the window at the endless rows of skyscrapers. There was not a shred of doubt in my soul. I want my capital back, Marcus. All of it. Down to the very last cent, down to the last dollar. Enforced, brutally, through an official court ruling. No out-of-court settlements, no family discounts, no leniency for age or health. We play at maximum stakes. How fast can we get this machine moving? With an evidentiary basis like this, where they documented their own intent? We can move at maximum velocity. Marcus smirked predatorily. To start, we'll send them an official pretrial demand on our law firm's heavy letterhead. We'll give them exactly 10 business days for voluntary liquidation of assets and repayment of the debt, accounting for interest. Though, as I gather from the recording, they don't have liquid cash? No, I replied in an icy tone. They don't have liquid cash and never did. They only know how to spend. But they do have one very substantial, real material asset, that very country house in Connecticut. Excellent, the lawyer nodded, making notes in his pad. Simultaneously with sending the demand, we will file an emergency motion with the district court to place a preliminary judicial lien on that real estate and land plot. This will freeze any maneuvers on their end. They won't be able to sell it, transfer it to Austin, gift it, or take out a new loan against it from a bank. I'll start drafting the lawsuit, Chloe. We are going to grind them into dust. The first crushing blow struck my parents exactly a week later. The morning quiet of their country home was shattered by the ring of a FedEx courier. My father, completely unsuspecting, walked out to the gates in his favorite robe and signed for a heavy, thick plastic envelope. Inside the envelope was an official pretrial demand, spanning 5 pages of complex, heavy legal text riddled with references to civil code statutes and state Supreme Court precedents. Marcus's firm officially demanded that Richard Collins and Austin Collins immediately, within 10 days, return funds in the amount of $124,500, including statutory interest accrued over these years for the wrongful use of someone else's finances, calculated at the maximum rate. Attached to the package of documents were copies of all 35 of my receipts, with the loan memo lines. My personal mobile phone, which until that moment had been pleasantly silent for a whole week, instantly turned into a roaring, vibrating siren. Calls came in a continuous, furious stream. Mother called, father called, Austin's phone exploded with messages. The landlines of my firm started receiving calls from random distant aunts and cousins who had sat at the far tables at the Jubilee and now burned with the desire to voice their heavy opinion on filial ingratitude. I configured my phone so that all calls from unrecognized numbers automatically redirected to the voicemail of my legal service. But on Wednesday evening, I decided to unblock my mother's number for exactly 1 minute. I needed to capture their legal position on tape. I pressed the accept button and silently brought the receiver to my ear. My mother's deafening, hysterical screech, breaking into ultrasound, instantly erupted from the speaker. She was literally choking on rage and panic. "Chloe! Have you completely lost your mind? What are you doing, you monster? What is this filthy garbage a courier brought us? What court demand? What the hell do you mean loans? Are you actually choosing to sue your own elderly parents? Did you decide to drive your own father into his grave?" His blood pressure spiked dangerously after that envelope. We had to call an ambulance. He's laying flat, unable to speak. What kind of monster are you? Who did you turn out like in our family? We raised you, fed you, clothed you, stayed up nights, put our entire souls into you. And you decided to throw us out onto the street over some stupid, innocent joke at a party? I listened to this flood of fury absolutely calmly, without changing my expression. My pulse was as steady as a surgeon's. "Mother," I interrupted her quietly, but with incredible clarity, "get a grip on yourself and read the attached documents carefully, syllable by syllable, together with Father. All the funds that I transferred to your accounts over the past 5 years were officially, legally processed by me as targeted loans. I have all the original bank receipts with the corresponding memos in my hands, which your bank accepted without objection. On audio tape, in the presence of 70 witnesses, you announced to everyone that I am a brainless cash cow and an idiot who needs to be squeezed dry to the last cent to sponsor Austin. I am simply showing you how those very rigid market and capitalist structures, which you and Father always treated with such deep intellectual contempt, actually function. From this moment on, any conversations with me are over. Have your lawyer contact Marcus. See you in court." "We will fight, do you hear me, you piece of trash?" she screamed in hysterics. "We will hire the best lawyer. We will tell the judge that you're lying about everything, that this recording is fake, illegal, that you gave us that money from a pure heart, as a gift. Nobody will believe you. Everyone will curse you." "Good luck, Mother," I said calmly, and pressed the end call button. This was our last personal conversation in life. Chapter 11. The Courtroom. The trial began in October 2026 in the District Civil Court. My parents, who naturally had no money for a proper legal defense, made yet another foolish mistake. They hired some cheap, loud-mouthed strip mall lawyer named Gary out of a classified ad. This Gary fellow seemed used to handling petty divorces and minor car accidents, so he decided to base his entire defense strategy on a purely emotional theatrical show. The courtroom was half empty, but my parents and Austin sat at the defense table. They looked calculatedly pathetic. My father wore his oldest, most frayed jacket, sighing theatrically every few moments and clutching his heart. My mother sat with tearful eyes, wrapped in a cheap gray shawl. Austin posed as a wrongfully accused genius, glaring at me with arrogant reproach. When the judge, a strict, composed, middle-aged woman named Judge Henderson, granted the floor to the defense, my parents' lawyer put on a real performance. He paced the room, waving his arms wildly, raising his voice to a dramatic shout, and appealing to higher morality. "Your Honor!" he exclaimed pathetically, pointing a finger at my parents. "Before you stand honest, noble, elderly citizens who have given their entire lives to public service and raising children. And right next to me is their successful, wealthy daughter, the owner of a large firm, basking in luxury. And now, this business lady has decided to use dubious technical loopholes to fleece her own parents. The funds she transferred were, without a question, voluntary daughterly aid, gifts from a pure heart. And those notes about loans in the bank statements are nothing more than a unilateral technical whim, a legal trick that the plaintiff added secretly behind the backs of the elderly defendants, taking advantage of their financial illiteracy. A successful child is obligated by the laws of honor to support their parents. Demanding this money back is the height of immorality and cynicism." Judge Henderson listened to this speech with an absolutely impenetrable, stone-cold face, propping her chin on her hand. When Gary finally ran out of breath and sat down, adjusting his tie, the judge turned to our table. "Does the plaintiff have any comments or additional evidence?" she asked. Marcus stood up slowly, adjusted the perfect cuffs of his expensive suit, and calmly approached the judge's bench. There was the confidence of a pedigree predator in his movements. "Yes, Your Honor," he said in a smooth, well-modulated voice. "The defense has spoken at length about morality and voluntary aid. However, the law operates on facts and documents. We have provided the court with 35 verified bank transactions spanning 5 years, where the status of the funds is clearly marked as a loan. The defendants accepted these funds, spent them, and never once in 5 years disputed the purpose of the payments with the bank. Legally, this constitutes their implied consent to the terms of an implied loan agreement. But to leave no doubt in the court's mind regarding the true nature of the parties' relationship and the defendant's intent, we move to enter into evidence an official audio file recorded 2 months ago during a public event." My parents' lawyer immediately jumped out of his seat, his face turning red. "Objection, Your Honor!" he shouted, waving his hands. "This audio recording is an illegal wiretap. It violates my client's right to privacy. It cannot be admitted as evidence." Marcus didn't even turn in his direction, merely raising an eyebrow slightly while continuing to address the judge directly. "Your Honor, the defendant's conversation was recorded on a digital mixing console in a hotel's public ballroom during a commercial banquet, with over 70 witnesses present. The recording was made using audio equipment officially rented and fully paid for by my client. The defendants voluntarily used wireless microphones provided by the organizers and conducted their conversation in a public space. According to our state's precedents, citizens do not and cannot have an expectation of privacy in a public place. Furthermore, we have submitted an official report from an independent digital forensics lab confirming that the voices on the recording belong 100% to Richard, Austin, and Eleanor Collins, and that the file itself is original, unaltered, and free of any editing or splicing. This recording directly proves material misrepresentation, fraudulent intent, and coordinated actions by the defendants to unlawfully extract someone else's capital." Judge Henderson nodded. "Defense objection overruled. The audio recording is admitted for playback in the courtroom. Technician, play the file." The extra lights in the room were dimmed, and that very conversation echoed from the ceiling speakers. The entire courtroom, clerks, bailiffs, stenographers, froze, listening to my father's rich baritone savoring how they would squeeze the fool dry, my mother calling me a brainless workhorse, and Austin lazily musing that I should toil for them until the day I die, because I didn't stand a chance at a personal life anyway with that robot personality. As the recording played, my parents' faces grew paler and paler. My father curled into himself, lowering his head, no longer faking a heart attack. He knew it was over. My mother covered her face with her hands and began to whine quietly and disgracefully. Their cheap lawyer, Gary, sat with his mouth wide open, looking back and forth at his clients in bewilderment. He realized he had been brutally blindsided by not being warned about such evidence. I looked at Judge Henderson. Her face had turned to granite. In her eyes, fixed on my parents, was a look of such deep, chilling contempt as I had never seen in another human being. When the recording ended, a dead, suffocating silence hung over the courtroom. The judge slowly closed the case file, neatly adjusted her documents, and looked at the defendants. It didn't take her long to make a decision. The case was crystal clear. "The court has heard the parties and reviewed the presented evidence," Judge Henderson said in a frigid, dry tone. "The plaintiff's documents are flawlessly executed. The loan memos constitute a legal basis for recovery. The defendant's audio recording fully and unconditionally confirms their intent to deliberately deceive, abuse trust, and unjustly enrich themselves at the plaintiff's expense. The court finds the defense's arguments groundless and cynical." The judge took her wooden gavel, raised it high, and brought it down on the block with a dull, crushing thud. "Judgment for the plaintiff in full. The defendants, Richard Collins and Austin Collins, are held jointly and severally liable to pay the plaintiff, Chloe Collins, the full principal debt amount of $124,500, as well as accrued interest, late fees, attorney fees, and all court costs. The total amount to be recovered is $139,800. The ruling takes effect immediately. The bailiffs are to proceed with the assessment and seizure of the defendant's assets to satisfy the judgment. Court is adjourned." Of course, my parents had nowhere near that kind of giant sum in cash. All of their personal bank accounts, audited by the bailiffs, turned out to be practically empty. There were only measly pennies left from their modest pensions, which wouldn't even cover the court costs. The only real, substantial, and valuable asset they owned was that very same luxurious, two-story, colonial-style estate in a prestigious Connecticut suburb. The exact house that existed and had been finished solely on my money. The enforcement proceedings spun into motion with the swift, ruthless speed of a state machine. A final judicial lien was officially placed on the real estate and the plot of land. On a gray, cold November day, 2 bailiff vehicles arrived at their gates, along with property appraisers. My parents in Austin were officially notified in writing that their property had been seized and was being put up for a mandatory public auction to liquidate the debt from the court judgment. They were given exactly 2 weeks to fully pack up their personal belongings and furniture and vacate the premises. This process turned into a prolonged, waking nightmare for them. Their luxurious lifestyle, built on lies and parasitism, was crumbling right before the eyes of the entire town. Country club neighbors, who had caught wind of the scandalous trial and the open microphone, pointedly walked past their gates, turning away and pretending not to notice my elderly parents carrying their belongings out to an old rented box truck in cheap plastic trash bags. The house went under the hammer at auction a couple of weeks before the winter cold set in. It was bought by some young, successful financier from New York. The funds obtained from the forced sale of the property were enough, down to the exact cent, to completely wipe out their entire $140,000 debt to me, as well as pay for the bailiff's work and the expensive services of Marcus's firm. My personal bank account was replenished by a large lump sum wire transfer from the state judicial department. My capital had returned to me, but far more severe and poetically just changes took place in my relatives' daily lives. They had to endure a crushing social fall. From their elite suburban mansion with white columns, they were forced to move to the most desolate, grimy industrial outskirts of a provincial town. There, sandwiched between old commercial railroad tracks and a smoking asphalt plant, stood a cramped, shabby 2-bedroom apartment in an old brick building built in the 1950s. This property had once, many years ago, been left to my mother by her late grandmother. All these years, they had rented it out for pennies to local day laborers and immigrants, treating the place with sneering disgust. Now, this ghetto became their new, permanent, and only home. My father, Richard, completely broke as a person after this devastating fiasco. All his bloated, pompous pride as an intellectual and philosopher evaporated, leaving behind only the pathetic shell of an embittered, frightened old man. He withdrew entirely into himself, not leaving the house for weeks and refusing to open the bedroom curtains. He is terrified to even step out to the local grocery store because he is mortally afraid of bumping into any of his former municipal colleagues or old acquaintances. The story of how the highly spiritual clerk Richard Collins, along with his precious son, got caught scampering into fraud against his own daughter via an open mic, instantly became the main, juiciest, and most scandalous piece of gossip in the whole county. But the most beautiful, radical, and just transformation happened to my dear younger brother Austin. My refined, pampered brother, the great thinker who in 26 years of life had never held anything heavier than a volume of Kierkegaard and a cup of expensive latte, suddenly found himself face to face with a brutal, aggressive, material reality. Without my secret monthly financial infusions, which used to allow our parents to live comfortably and allocate their golden boy generous pocket money for his endless wellness retreats and silk shirts, his idle lifestyle was over once and for all. Still, nobody wanted to pay for his deep, convoluted philosophical essays in independent online magazines. In the real world of primitive capitalism that he so despised, his pseudo-intellectual gibberish turned out to be completely useless to everyone. Creditors and collection agencies handling his old, minor debts, whom I was no longer holding back with my money, quickly filed personal civil lawsuits against him, completely froze his accounts, and tanked his personal credit score to rock bottom, turning him into a financial pariah. Since our parents occupied both tiny bedrooms in their new slum on the outskirts, Austin had to live around the clock in the walk-through living room on an old, sagging sofa bed with protruding springs. Every single day, from morning till night, he is forced to listen to the bitter, endless reproaches of our father, who blames him, saying, "It's because of your cursed microphone that we lost everything," and the continuous, dreary wailing of our mother, mourning her velvet dress and lost status. In the end, as always happens in human history, harsh physiological hunger completely defeated all of his elevated existential philosophy. For the first time in his pampered life, Austin had to draft a resume and log on to job search websites. It turned out that his unfinished humanities education, total lack of any practical skills, and around 0 in the work experience column made him an absolutely unemployable candidate in a tough, competitive labor market. They wouldn't even hire him as a retail sales associate in a local clothing store or as a cashier in fast food. Hiring managers rejected him flatly after 5 minutes of interviewing, noting his absolute arrogance, haughtiness, inability to communicate with normal people, and total lack of basic professional discipline. Austin was used to looking down on the world and people from the position of an unrecognized genius, whereas real work required subordination and service. A few weeks ago, I received an unexpected call on my work phone from Uncle Kevin. He was the only person out of our entire extended family who, after that memorable scandal in the ballroom, retained a shred of sanity and honesty and wasn't afraid to keep in touch with me. "Chloe, hey!" Uncle Kevin said quietly into the receiver, and his usually cheerful voice held strange, complex tones, a mix of irony and deep shock. "The other day, I was driving past that big commercial construction site on business, the one where they're widening the federal highway on the edge of town. And you simply won't believe who I saw there with my own eyes." I leaned back in my chair, twirling a pen in my fingers. "And who was it, Uncle Kevin?" "Your brother, Chloe, the great philosopher Austin Collins," he sighed into the phone. "Our fragile boy with the soul of an artist is standing right there in the mud at the very edge of the roadbed. He's wearing this wretched, dirty neon orange vest with reflective strips, a plastic hard hat, and he has a heavy shovel in his hands. He's working in the lowest crew of day laborers for the contractors, hauling heavy sheets of drywall, mixing cement in a concrete mixer, unloading trucks of cinder blocks, and clearing construction debris for the masons. His face is completely gray with dust, dark circles under his eyes, hands covered in calluses. He looks absolutely, wildly miserable and crushed. I purposely stopped the car, walked past him on foot, and said a loud hello. Well, the moment he recognized me, he shrunk back, turned bright red, didn't utter a single word, just mumbled something incoherent under his breath, and buried his eyes in the ground, continuing to furiously shovel gravel. His foreman later told me in confidence that the guy tries to read some smart paperback books during his short 15-minute lunch breaks, sitting on an overturned paint bucket. But after 10 hours of grueling, back-breaking physical labor in the cold, he barely has the strength and coordination to stumble to the bus stop, ride to his hovel, and drop dead onto his torn sofa. That's his reality now, Chloe. Believe it or not. I listened to Uncle Kevin's detailed account and, to my own surprise, felt absolutely nothing inside my soul. No wild rush of joy, no malice, not even a petty, vengeful satisfaction. There was only a deep, monolithic, and calm sense of closure. It was as if the complex ledger of my life, which for 30 long years had shown a catastrophic deficit of my energy, love, and money, had finally balanced out to a perfect, crystal-clear zero. Austin had wanted so badly and for so long to understand the true essence of human existence in theory? Well, great news for him. Grueling physical labor for pennies for the benefit of society is perhaps the best, most efficient, and fastest way to learn the harsh material realities of this world. Let him learn. Life is an excellent teacher. She charges a high price, but she explains things very clearly. And here we are again, back in the present. Outside the window, it is the height of summer 2026. The clock on my office wall shows 1:30 in the morning. The metropolis beyond the panoramic windows of my penthouse is gradually quieting down, sinking into a hazy night chill, with only rare cars shining their headlights on the dark avenues far below. I sit in my deep leather armchair, slowly sipping cooled chamomile tea. My gaze falls once more upon that very same gray plastic flash drive from the gala evening, which lies lonely in the circle of lamplight on the mahogany surface of the desk. This little piece of gray plastic, it cost me a family. It permanently erased from my life the people I had considered my closest and dearest for 30 years. But in return, it gave me back something far more valuable, something that cannot be bought for all the millions in the world. It gave me back my own, real life, my freedom, my dignity. Sometimes, in rare moments of silence, I ask myself the same question. What would have happened if Austin had been just a bit more careful on that fateful June evening? What if his radio transmitter had worked perfectly and he had successfully turned off that damn microphone before they walked into the dressing room? What if they had kept their tongues behind their teeth in the presence of the guests? The answer to that question scares me with its obviousness. I know what would have happened. I would still, like a submissive, blind sheep, log into my banking portal every month and press the Approve Transfer button. I would have paid off their huge mortgage in Connecticut to the very end, finished building that luxurious house for them, fully supported their old age, and paid for Austin's endless trips to Sedona, his new gadgets, and his expensive cars. And all the while, I would have continued to humbly arrive once a year for the 4th of July in an old gray hoodie, taking their passive-aggressive jabs, mockery, and accusations of being callous, selfish, and bourgeois, living with an eternal, gnawing sense of guilt before their intellectual and spiritual superiority. I would have spent the rest of my life in an invisible but sturdy cage built on fabricated duty and manipulation. I would have been used until I was dry, and then simply tossed away as useless once my resources ran out. Therefore, looking at the situation coldly and cynically, my father's drunken arrogance and my brother Austin's technical incompetence were the greatest, most priceless gifts I have ever received in my life. They themselves, with their own hands and tongues, ruthlessly ripped away those beautiful, noble masks under which ordinary, rotten predators and parasites had hidden for years. The truth turned out to be incredibly ugly, filthy, and chilling, but it worked a miracle. It made me completely, absolutely free. The toxic guilt left my soul forever, as if it had never been there. Having cut away that mental ballast, I felt how easy it became to breathe. When well-meaning distant relatives still try to write to my work email or reach out through rare acquaintances, appealing to my emotions, "Chloe, think about it. They are your parents, your mother and father, no matter what the truth is. How could you let them live in that old hovel by the factory and force your brother to haul cement? This is your duty." I don't even read those letters to the end. I just hit the delete key and send them to the trash, and the sender's numbers into a permanent block. My conscience before these people is cleaner than ever. I paid their bills, their whims, and for their lives for far too long. I gave them more than enough of my energy, health, and money. Now it's time for them to pay the bills themselves. That is exactly how a fair, honest market works. For every deception, for every betrayal, the time always comes to settle the account, and their payment deadline has arrived. Now I spend my dirty corporate money exclusively on myself, on growing my business, on charitable projects where help is truly needed, and on people who sincerely love and appreciate me for who I actually am, rather than for how many thousands of dollars can be squeezed out of my checkbook. I have started traveling the world a lot, not to overhyped wellness retreats for empty social media photos, but to those secluded, beautiful corners of the planet where I can just sit on the ocean shore, listen to the sound of the waves, and feel alive. I finally bought this luxurious penthouse with 360-degree panoramic views, which I had secretly dreamed of back during those cold Brooklyn winters when I slept under 3 coats. I slowly reach out my hand and take the gray plastic flash drive from the desk. Its edges gleam coldly in the lamp's light. I slide open the lowest, deepest drawer of my heavy document cabinet, where the archived, old, dust-covered tax reports of my firm from a decade ago are kept. I toss the flash drive into the farthest, darkest corner of that drawer, between the dusty folders. I never need to listen to it again. I no longer need to prove anything to anyone. The legal cases are officially closed, all debts are recovered down to the last cent, the illusions are shattered, and the ballast is dropped. The saga of the family disgrace and the callous, selfish Chloe is over once and for all. My own, real, free life is finally beginning. And you know what? Up here, on the 45th floor, in my penthouse overlooking the glowing, conquered metropolis, the air is incredibly clean, fresh, and light. And I can breathe now like never before. That's all for today. Thank you for choosing Storytime Drama. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our upcoming videos. Take care of yourselves, and we will see each other very soon. Goodbye!